3 Amherst schools. The Bear Mountain Mission School. The Bear Mountain Indian Mission School was started by Northern white missionaries in the 1870s in a log cabin on Bear Mountain, Kenmore Road in Amherst, Virginia. The mission school was established to teach primarily Monacan Indian children. In 1908, Reverend Arthur Gray established an Episcopal church presence on Bear Mountain. A local resident bought for the church a quarter acre on which St. Paul's Episcopal Chapel and 4 additional schoolrooms were built. The Episcopalians sent missionaries who took over the operation of the school and soon lived next to the church. In the 1920s, Dr. Walter Plecker ran the Bureau of Vital Statistics in Virginia. In 1925, Dr. Plecker began a campaign stating there were no pure Indians remaining in Virginia, and that all those claiming to be Indians were mixed-blood Negroes. Dr. Plecker established a list of names he considered to be of mixed families. He restricted these families' rights, including the right to attend white schools. In the 1930 census, Dr. Plecker insisted that all Indian people in Amherst be listed as colored. Letters of protest were sent to Washington by Monacans and others, without success. By 1946, the Amherst County schools were sending white teachers to teach 1st through 7th grade at the mission school. Bear Mountain Mission School ended at 7th grade, although in its latter years, mission worker Miss Groff arranged for 8th grade correspondence courses. In 1956, mission worker and teacher Florence Cowan began campaigning for Monacan children to be able to attend white schools. Finally, in 1963, with the Episcopal Church backing Miss Cowan and the Indian families in their push for integration, 23 students were placed in white Amherst County schools. The Bear Mountain Indian Mission School closed in 1963. The log cabin school building has been placed on the National Register of Historic Places and historically restored as a part of the Monacan Indian Ancestral Museum, with partial funding from the Virginia Foundation for the Humanities.
I thought it was a big place with a lot of kids. I guess back when I was young, but as I look back on later years, it's kind of a small place compared to some of the modern schools today.
Well, it looks very similar to what we still have. We've renovated it back to that time period, and the log cabin actually goes back to 1914. And when I was at school here, there was classes being held in the log cabin itself. And the newer part of the building was used for the younger kids, which I was one of, and there were grades 1 through 7 was a total school.
When I first started the school, we walked through the farm, through another farm, over to, I guess it's called Father Judge Road. And we caught the bus there, which was probably about 2.5, 3 miles we had to walk, catch the bus. In later years, we started catching it in Faulknerville. And my dad or somebody would drive us out there in the mornings to catch the bus. And then we would walk back in the afternoons.
Mrs. Austin that lived on Sunset Drive. She taught at the school, but she didn't teach me. But she would pick up us and take us to school.
I was fortunate enough that there was a bus that ran to the Amherst Elementary School that would pick us up and drop us off here and then continue on to Amherst and pick up other kids that went to that school.
It seemed like to me we had to be in the school by 9. And when we left, if we was here by 9, we had to go into the church. Because Miss Cannon and Miss Groff was here then. So they brought all the children into the church. We'd get in a line from the school and come across and ran the road there. and go into church and have prayer and everything before we started our classes. And then after that, we'd go back and start our classes over in the building.
We'd probably do a couple of different things, like reading or math, spelling, and then we'd go and eat lunch, go outside and play, and then we'd come back in and finish up for the rest of the day. Most of the time, we had extra time when we wasn't doing class work, and that's how when I done my homework, if we had any. And then we'd shove our books in the little desk and go on home, and next morning start all over again.
It was a mission school, like I said, and all this time it really, we got taught all the, the arithmetic, the English, the geography, the history, and different stuff like that. The only time that we were in the church was before we started our school of the mornings.
Well, a little primer, we used to read the primer book. I'll never forget that little book. And that little book of Spot.
Dick, Jane.
Dick and Jane Spot or whatever.
My favorite was math, and always was and had been, so I was pretty good in that. I didn't like the English or the reading. Didn't care a whole lot for history at that time, but as you get older, your interests change, and now I really like to study the history, and not only of the Monacan people, but a lot of other things too.
And can you tell me who your teacher was and
Miss Mildred Davis.
And what do you remember about Mrs. Davis?
She was a super teacher. She was just down to earth, and she loved Monacan Indian children.
And especially you, because you were her
And
baby.
especially me, because I was her pet. I was a teacher's pet.
She began teaching at the mission school in 1959 and stayed there until integration, which she was very much followed, by the way, in 1962, if memory serves me correctly. And then after that, Mother taught at Amelon School, and she loved teaching. And the highlight of her career was the Indian Mission School. She absolutely loved the people, the patrons, the students. She just loved the whole environment.
Well, we had Ms. Alpin, Laura J. Alpin was one, Pauline Smith was one, Mary Gay Hicks was one, Ms. Bailey Davis was one, but all of them has passed away now that we had.
My mother loved teaching. She just loved it. And she loved students. And she was very anxious for everybody to have an opportunity to learn. That was one of her goals in life, to see how many people she could help.
They were teachers with the Amherst school system, but the buildings and the property itself belonged to the Episcopal Church.
Well, I think Miss Groff's thing was a math, She wanted you to get that math down packed. It wasn't nothing but, 2 plus 1 and 2 plus 2 and stuff like that. But she wanted you to remember that. Miss Hicks was reading, always reading that book, and wanted you to read that book all the time and stuff. And if you got caught looking out the window when you were supposed to be reading, you got in trouble. And you didn't get to go out for recess if you got in trouble. You sat in that desk. I remember they couldn't go with the rest of the kids and play, if you got in trouble.
Well, my mom went here, and she said that they always made her cook because she was the best cook. That's when they had the warm meals. So she was in charge of that, and she didn't like it. Excuse me, but it was one thing she told me that was going on when she was in school here, and I do remember the restrooms being outside. Actually, they were out here on the hill, and you had to come up the hill to come to them. And I had a problem saying excuse, and you had to raise your hand up to ask if you can be excused to come to the restaurants. And I couldn't say excuse, I said excuse. And the teacher would almost make me stand there until I got it to where she was satisfied with the way I was saying it, but it was hard. And, I do remember that.
I guess there were those two distinct memories. that I have. We used to, all of us boys, there's woods above the school. And we used to go up there at lunchtime and get in those trees, and those small trees, we would swing from one tree to the other. And then the other thing is, I don't know if you noticed there, from the church where the road is, those big pipes there. We used to hang around in those pipes up there at lunchtime, and in the creek, you know, pull our shoes off, stuff like that.
Phyllis and myself we were best of friends and still friends till this day. But we would go off and kind of stay to ourselves, you know, and talk and girly things, you know. And there was a couple of guys a couple of the boys we did like, but then they always thought they were something. They would go down the creek and play, try to find a frog or anything they could to put on us girls.
Well, all of us was kin to each other. And we all had a good relationship with each other. I know, you know, we was young and wild. And would have our fusses and arguments, you know, if somebody said something or something like that. But I loved it, just the fact of being with family, you know, having your family around you.
And there were people in our tribe that had a yearning for education, but once the 7th grade, because of the schools system here, we weren't allowed in the public schools. Once you finished 7th grade, you went to work basically. And most of the jobs here were very low paying, working in the apple orchards. Both of my parents worked in the apple orchards. My grandparents worked in the apple orchards, and housing was very low. 99% of them had no running water. Most of them did have electricity, but even that in some houses wasn't there.
Did the school have running water or electricity?
It had electricity, but no running water.
What about heat?
Heat was provided by wood stoves.
Wood stuff.
Even though it was mostly Monicans, most of our education about the Monacan people back then came from our own parents. And that was limited because of the racism here in Amherst County. And you know, my grandmother told me one time that if the wrong people heard us talking about being Indian, we might not even have a place to live the following day. So, you know.
I guess in later years, after I found out why I was going to that school, if I had known at that particular time, it might have been difficult for me. But and I'm sure that you, if you've been around any length of time at all, you know the history of this Amherst County.
I was here until the 8th grade.
And then what did you do after that?
After that, we was allowed to go into the white schools, and I went to Amherst County High School and stayed there 10th grade, I think it was. I did the 9th and I did the 10th. And didn't go the 11th and 12th. I got to school. But that was a time when things was right rough at that time. You know, that it just had to be motivated to make yourself go and go through the things you went through at that time. Yeah.
To me, it was the same thing. It wasn't no different from the mission school. It's just that we had more classrooms at the elementary schools, and we could walk up the street to the dentist.
And I just heard my wife relating this to a lady the other night about this one niece that she has. Because those two girls that had to ride a taxi to the school, because the school bus wouldn't pick them up even after the school was integrated. School bus driver wouldn't pick them up. So they rode a taxi from down here on Kenmore Road to Amherst every day.
And who paid for the taxi?
The family did.
The family did.
The family did.
You know, I just thought, you know, that I was just an ordinary kid, just like anybody else. You know, that all of us were just ordinary kids. You know. And when I went to the elementary schools, I don't remember, you know, not being able to ride the school bus, or, you know, because my first remembrance in going to elementary school was I was riding a school bus.
First bus ride I stood up for 2 days before anybody would let me sit down. Then this one guy that was high school, he was, I think, like 11th grade or something, and he gave me a seat to sit down. And then after he gave me a seat, well, after that, everybody else would give me a seat. My mom helped me a lot when I was coming up to try to understand about how people thought about demonic people and how people treated us. And my mom used to be an inspiration because she'd always say, Phyllis, don't be ashamed of who you are. Just because so-and-so said this or so-and-so said it, don't never be ashamed of who you are. Be proud of who you are.
No matter what color your skin is, that don't make you a bad person. It don't make you a good person. You know, I want them to grow up to be able to recognize how the Monacan Indians was treated, and I want them to know our heritage, and I want them to grow up and, you know, be the best they can be.
This is a sacred place to me, and it's a place where I can come and be who I am, and, you know, kind of forget the outside pressures of the outside world.